المنهج التجريبي او المنهج شبه التجريبي.
يعني تبقى تستنبط كده.
مدرسة المناهج بيعتبروا انه بعض الاسئله اللي
لان
معانا
ده
من خلال
الديزاين بتاع البروجرام نفسه.
اوكي معانا من خلال الخبره النظري.
بالظبط.
اوكي اتس اوكي.
الاختلاف لا يفسد الود.
لا
الدكتور عبد الناصر حلقة وسط.
Again, it's related number 4, 6, 7, 9. Then if we go to page 9.
80 or 9?
It will be 90 soon. It will be 90 soon. Hypothesis number 1. There is a statistical, 1 and 2. There is a statistically significant difference among the mean ranks of the scores of the 3 groups in the post-application. It's called post-test. Of the full decoding test. There is, so, it's some sort of direction here. It's directed. So you should say in favor of or favoring so and so. And number 2. In favor of experimental group in each case. Then I have no follow-up. There is no follow-up here. Okay, in psychology, when I have a program, effectiveness of a program should be evaluated in 2 separate occasions. To say that this program is effective, I should evaluate the program on 2 separate occasions. The first is the post-test and the second will be the follow-up. So there should be follow-up so as to say that the program is effective. Purpose of the study.
بس انا فاتنا دلوقتي انا والدكتور عبد الناصر ناس في مجلس الشعب. لو عملت فولو اب 1 و 2 مثلا او 1 بس.
لا يعني بعد شهر على طول مجرد تطبيق فقط.
لسه ممتاز. ايوه مش عندنا
try to reformulate the purpose according to the type. Then the design on page 10, design. Quasi-experimental. Why quasi-experimental? You have an intervention here. The difference between okay, we have quasi-experimental and experimental method. Both, I try to examine the effect of A on B, variable A on variable B. The difference between quasi-experimental and experimental is that for quasi-experimental, I'm trying to examine the effect of variable A on B without intervention. But when I intervene, so it is experimental. You have an experiment here. When I examine the effect of variable A on variable B with the intervention, it should be experimental method, not quasi-experimental.
Can I intervene معلش؟ احنا عندنا الكوازاي experimental or quasi experimental whatever you call it. احنا we have whatever 1 experimental or 2 experimental groups. لكن the choice of the participants is not random. You would take intact group. أنا كان الquestion بتاعي this is not quasi. أنا بس هقولها بطريقة تانية because you have not taken an intact class as is. أنت were very selective. This is a purposeful sample. يبقى it's not quasi. It is experimental. أرجع بس أقولها بطريقة تانية.
Then significance of the study, the last line, again reading disabled children in Egypt, not in Egypt, just here in this gathering.
It's not generalizable. The results are not generalizable to all Egyptians.
On page 11, instruments. You are not designing an instrument. Instrument is not designed. The design here has to do with architecture. You develop a scale, you develop a system, you develop a program. Then these are the instruments. These are the instruments. Instruments here has nothing to do with learning disabilities. There is no instrument dealing with learning disabilities. Neurological screening test should be used here. 12. Yes, using discrepancy and exclusion criteria. This is the first time to use exclusion, then another time when in the discussion section. 13. Now we are speaking about experimental procedures. Administering the post-test for then statistically analyzing the results. That's not right. Then again, for definition of terms, you should. Here, terms should be repeated or should be repeated according to the introduction. First, learning disabilities. No? Then
sequence.
There should be sequence here. For decoding, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 definitions. Then an operational one. According to these 4, which one I'm going to adapt? Here, just one. Not 4. If you want to explain or to give more than one definition, you can take this in the literature. And page ends with a title. Operational definition for multisensory approach and for phonics approach has nothing to do with motivation. It looks like you neglected motivation or forgot it. Reading disabilities. Here, this is the definition or the term of reading disabilities. You give here a definition, not learning disabilities as a whole. Students are defined as having reading disabilities if there is a substantial discrepancy between their aptitude, typically operationalized by IQ, and their reading performance. Now, I think that in the introduction, you mentioned national committee. And you also mentioned the reference of Halahan and Kaufman. By the way, I translated this reference, Halahan and Kaufman, about 1,500 pages.
It's a Bible of this type.
Yeah.
Yes.
I translated it into Arabic. Since you mentioned the National Committee, the only definition we deal with now, and the only correct one, is that of the National Committee, or Joint Committee. Joint National Committee. This is the only correct one used throughout the world. Chapter 2. In Chapter 2, review of literature, items should be reordered according to the introduction section. Learning disabilities, then reading disabilities, then decoding difficulties, then reading motivation, and in students with decoding difficulties, should be specific. Then remedy or decoding difficulties, phonics approach, multisensory approach, then finally reflection on motivation. The sequence should be like this. On page 18, the diagram here, figure 1. First figure 1, and what's written about it should be the middle of the line. The middle. So motivation to learn. Look at the diagram. The one with black, extrinsic. The one with gray,
Extrinsic.
25. خلاص دكتور عبد الناصر جرينا. 25 motivation. الله يخليك دكتور. Motivation and students with learning disabilities. This is a good section because you specify it. But what's written here is not enough. Yeah, it's very good, but it's not enough. 27. Again, dyslexia. Try to differentiate. 27. Okay. 45. Page 45. Insistence on depending on just one criterion. Discrepancy. Then, in this community, which community? You say the paragraph, the second paragraph after the title. Too few children can compete in higher education, and about half fail to complete the high school. In this community, which community? 46. Last paragraph, fourth line. And because of their problems to be chronic and tremendous. Chronic and tremendous. Then, several studies, however, confirm that students with learning disabilities can overcome. What do you mean by overcome? What do you mean by overcome? Yeah. Okay. Because their problems here are chronic and tremendous. You told this. Again, a title at the end of the page, 47. You wrote here that decoding difficulties as a serious feature of students with learning disabilities. Huh? Confirm this. 48. Fourth line. Jewel, 1988, as cited in Beek, and Jewel, 1995. Who is cited in, which is cited in which? Which is cited in which? It is supposed that you begin with 1995 as cited in 1988.
لا جوال cited in this is the main reference. Beck and Jewel is the
Beck
main.
and Jewel cited Jewel and she is cited. This is a secondary.
Yes, this is the main reference.
Secondary resource.
وده secondary resource اللي هو جوال.
بس هي بترجع لمين؟ هي بترجع للاخير. هي باجي الحديث قال as cited in في القديم.
هو
يعني انا رجعت للمرجع الحديث، فبقول ان فلان ده اهو سنه كذا as cited in اللي قبله. لان الحديث هو اللي خد مني.
لا
الحديث هو اللي خد.
بس الحديث
يعني انا كتبت في 2000 وخدت عن واحد كاتب في 75.
هي كانت تقول بقى بيك اند جوال.
ايوه as cited in
يعني تقدم.
لان انا في 2000 كتبت حاجه خدتها من الدكتور عبد الناصر في 90.
لا هي
انا قلت كذا as cited in.
لا هي خدت هي
حلها بانها في نهايه الباراجراف تكتب انه سايتد امتى.
اوكي.
بلاش يعني complicated
اوكي.
انا صح جدا 100%.
اوكي.
لان هي واخده من الاوريجينال، لكن الاوريجينال
هي صح كده بس عايزه
هي رجعت له الى سكندري ريسورس.
الدكتور بس عشان حتى ما يبقاش فيه لغط فيها او لبس فيها.
مش لغط يا دكتور، ده
واضحه. انا عارف انها واضحه
جدا في كل
بس ممكن نكتبها في اخر الاقتباس.
لا
فلان خلاص ان
خلاص ماشي الطلب.
لا
prerequisite skills of decoding, phonological awareness and alphabetic principle, and both are academic skills. Pay attention to this. Both are three academic skills. And this is good. 58. Again, a title at the end of the page. 62. Here you dealt with reading disabilities, as if you deal with, or as if it were learning disabilities. Okay, you should differentiate between them. 66. Here principles, it will suggest various principles that need to be incorporated in intervention for students with reading disabilities as follows. Here, you should pay attention to these principles when you develop the program. This should be incorporated in the program. 68. Phonics approach. Most of what you have written here, you are dealing with a normal situation and normal students. You should write something about those students specifically. Then you should mention its role, the role of this approach on remedying decoding difference. Okay? You should write something about it. But both approaches are doing well with decoding. Page 69, the last paragraph. Now you speak about the normal students and normal situations, then finally, or suddenly you said, thus it can be assumed that using phonics approach in teaching reading to RD students is essential. What is this? Nothing is written about those students. I should write something about them first, then I can say, I assume so and so. By using these children and reading disabilities can learn the correspondences between sounds and letters. And this enables them to decode words. This means that although they cannot decode, they will be able to decode if we use phonics approach. This is what I understand from what you have written here. And this paragraph is the only thing written about those participants. Page 73. Again, we have characteristics, and you should pay attention that these characteristics should be incorporated in your program. 76. Characteristics. 78. I want here to write something about children with reading disabilities or children with decoding difficulties. 79. Again, you end here at the end of this chapter. You finished speaking about this approach without saying how can this approach affect the students with reading disabilities or affect decoding difficulties. Okay? 81. 81. 81. Here you have three groups. This is the methodology. You have three groups. What is the matching here? By the way, you told homogeneity. Now